Welcome to Divorce and Relationships Decoded, the show that takes the guesswork out of love, loss, and everything in between. Hosted by me, Jennifer Perri, a CDC-certified divorce and empowerment coach, and Dr. Deborah Wilder, a divorce and relationship expert. This is the place where real conversations meet expert advice. So get ready to decode divorce and relationships like never before. Divorce and Relationships Decoded starts now. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Divorce and Relationships Decoded. I am one of your hosts, Jennifer Perri. I'm a CDC certified divorce and empowerment coach, and I am joined by my dear friend, Dr. Deborah Wilder, who is a divorce and relationship specialist. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jennifer?
Good. We're doing good. We're just giggling over here because Deborah is grand dog sitting.
Yep. My grandpuppy who says, yes, he's a doll. He's a big, solid American bully who is, I was saying to Jennifer, if I didn't know him, he would scare the what out of me. The way he looks, but he is the cutest, sweetest. And yes, so I just had to check on him a moment ago. He's a big baby.
So he may chime in.
He could
possibly chime in and have a couple things to say during this episode, and maybe you could break up the tenseness of this episode, because we're going to talk about narcissists, and we all know them. We've all probably at some point loved one. I know I did. And we're going to really talk about their playbook. We're going to talk about manipulation tactics that they even use after divorce. And Deborah, you are now you want to tell us what you are?
I'm a certified narcissistic abuse treatment clinician, and I've been doing work with victims/survivors of emotional and narcissistic abuse for a long time, and just wanted to dive as deeply as I could and be even more prepared as I could be to help these folks. I've worked with men and women, but mostly women who struggle with this. And this topic is a very important one. Unfortunately, it's necessary to talk about.
And it's a topic that you and I both talk about with our clients in this space, but it's also one of if not the number one keyword that is researched on YouTube in conjunction with divorce as well. Mm-hmm. Definitely want to make sure that we try to knock off as many of the tactics and strategies and things that happen, because it's not just 5 or 3 or 10. There's a bunch of different strategies that narcissists use. But why don't we start it off by really defining what a narcissist is and in a relationship, so that people that are listening, if they don't know, and I've met women who had no idea that the person that they were with was a narcissist. They literally blame themselves for the downfall of everything that happened to them. So if we can just start it off by defining what a narcissist is, that would be great.
I will say every narcissist is an emotional abuser, but not every emotional abuser is a narcissist. So just because someone may have narcissistic traits, but they may not be a diagnosed narcissist. But basically, narcissists have a lack of empathy, a need for control. They can just be mean to one person in particular, or a couple of people behind closed doors, because when they're out in public, a lot of people would be surprised at what these people do in private. They're very controlling, coercive control. They gaslight. They really oftentimes love bomb in the beginning of a relationship and get you off balance, and you maybe fall for these folks. And then over time, things change, and then there's a cycle of abuse. Eventually, the love bombing slows down, and then the nastiness can begin. And that can look a whole bunch of different ways during the marriage or relationship, and as you were talking about, during divorce and after divorce as well. Narcissists don't change. True narcissists don't change. And so I think I'd mentioned in a number of sessions before, I had one of my patients ask me, a male patient, he said, yes, do you think I'm a narcissist? And I smiled, because a narcissist isn't going to ask that question.
Right.
They're just not going to ask. They're not going to they don't want to know, but they just don't, because they do no wrong. But basically, a narcissist is someone who's very hurtful. They lack empathy. They use guilt and gaslighting and manipulation to the point where a lot of people feel they don't feel like themselves anymore. A lot of people in relationships with a narcissist, and emotional abusers as well, but narcissists take it to a different level. And these don't have to just be partners. You could grow up with family members who are narcissists, or siblings, or friends, or people in the community. But the main thing is a lack of empathy. There is manipulation. There is a desire to hurt. I have a lot of people, and probably a lot of people have asked you too, why did I stay so long with this person? And it's not a simple answer, and it's not a sign of weakness. Narcissists who aren't family members, let's just say, they pick people who make them look good. They pick people who are loyal. They choose people who are vulnerable, who are often emotionally available, who want to please them, who want the relationship to work. And then they eventually start taking advantage of that. And then there's a cycle of abuse. And that cycle of abuse is, there's an addictive quality to these narcissistic relationships. And there's something called, I know I'm kind of going all over the place, and this really is a discussion. This could take hours and hours and hours. We don't have, but this cycle is tremendous, and it's a very common cycle. And there's something that is often developed called a trauma bond, which actually has kind of chemical components to it. The dopamine, when things go well, boy, the dopamine released and all of that feels really good. And like an addiction, like a drug addiction. And then you crave more. And then you go through withdrawals. And then you get the good stuff again. And that just, like an addiction, it keeps you in, it keeps you bonded with the hope that somebody difficult is going to love me finally or eventually. Or you at some point get broken down, worn down so much that it's all you can do to try to keep the peace. You're often in a hypervigilant state, walking on eggshells, because you never know who's going to walk through the door, let's say if you're in a relationship. And by that time, you've lost a lot of yourself, a whole lot of yourself. And if you have kids, you want to protect the kids too. And maybe it's more protective if you stay in the relationship than get out of it. And then there's something called, you mentioned before our call, something called hoovering, which is when, let's say, you try to leave a relationship or try to distance yourself, even if it's a family member or a romantic relationship, a marriage or something like that. Sometimes when people try to leave, they're hoovered back in, like the vacuum, hoovering. And so the narcissist tries to lure them back in. And sometimes it happens over and over again. I read comments that people write about being in narcissistic relationships. I left this person, but I went back, and 18 years later, I regret going back. But this has nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with your own character and your own pain and survival. At some point, it becomes a matter of survival. That's why you stay. And it's so hard to leave. So anybody who's watching or listening, if you're in a narcissistic relationship or you're with somebody who has narcissistic traits, it doesn't mean that you're weak, that you're staying, but you've got to get help. You've got to get help getting out, because it's very hard to do on your own. But these people, you make them look good, which is why they want you around, okay? Because you're intellectual, you're intelligent, because you're loyal, again, because you're a nice person, because you try to make them feel good. All sorts of reasons. It's not a sign of weakness. It's really a sign of being trauma bonded, scared, all sorts of reasons people stay. And then once you leave, again, it's really, really hard sometimes to stay away, because the love bombing may start again, and they might guilt trip you into coming back. They're so sorry, they never knew. And I'll say something else. When I work with couples, whether or not there's any narcissism, whatever, that doesn't matter in this sort of thing. But what often happens is, I'll ask a question. If someone wants to break up, they want a divorce or whatever, and the other person, after all that they've been through, says, "Oh no, I don't want you. I really love you. I don't want you to leave." I think it's important to note that this person might be wanting to come back because he or she is hurting, not because he or she has hurt you. If they were so concerned with how you were feeling, they would have done something already. But now that they're hurting, now they want to do something. So this, again, is a common theme. Narcissists are master gaslighters. They're masters at trying to manipulate your own reality so you doubt it. You begin to doubt, you question your own reality. So that gut instinct, which is truly a physiological thing, it's a gut instinct. That is a physiological thing. that's not even on anymore. You don't trust yourself anymore. And that's where a lot of people just lose themselves. And even during divorce, and I work with so many people right now going through divorce who are they get raked over the coals because the abuser now becomes legal abuse. So not only does the narcissist or the emotional abuser continue on, his or her attorney does it too, knowingly or unknowingly. Because again, narcissists can be very charming, and people in the public eye aren't going to look at this person and say, if there's an accusation, he was awful to me, they might look and say, no, I've not seen that. Nobody else has seen it. But behind closed doors, that's when they show up without the veneer. They show up without the sheep's clothing. You see it. And gosh, there's so much there. And I am passionate about helping people through because I hate bullies. I cannot stand bullies. And these are master bullies. So that being said, there's so much there. But again, if you're going through anything like this, there are ways to get help. For sure, there are ways to get help. But if you have kids, these folks will use their kids, your kids, their kids, as pawns, as ways to manipulate, as threats. If you try to get money out of me or whatever, I'll take the kids. You won't ever see them. And unfortunately, sometimes they can do things like that. I'm working with someone. I've been working with her it's been over 3 years. They're still fighting. He pulled some stuff like I've never seen before. And she lost the kids. And she's been fighting to get them back. And I've seen it in their emails, the way that I can't give identifying information, but the things that he would write to her via email when they were married, just the awful abuse, proven abuse. Yet he ended up with the kids because of false allegations, which is something that you got to be careful of. One thing I will say, and Jennifer, you and I talked about this before, I offer a kind of a foundational, fundamental hour and 15-minute long course on going through divorce, from a dirty divorce from an emotional abuser, someone who is emotionally abusive, who could be a narcissist, and the tactics that they use. And something that is critical, absolutely critical, is to maintain your emotional and mental well-being. Because if you look unstable, they're going to use that against you. Just anything you say can and will be used against you. Anything you do or say can and will be used against you in the court of narcissistic abuse. Again, it becomes legal abuse. It's very important to maintain your mental stability at a time when you've never felt worse in your life, at a time when you've never felt so insecure and unsure and scared. That's when you have to show up the most stable. And we talk about that too. There are ways to do that. Takes a lot of work. But it's a big deal. It's a big deal, this stuff that's going on. And it's a concept that is gaining more and more and more attention nowadays. And I don't know if there's something, in the water. I don't know what's going on, or all these, and maybe it's because we're talking about it more, people are coming out more and people are able to identify this isn't normal. Maybe there really isn't something so wrong with me as much as I'm in a toxic, dangerous, sick relationship with someone who really is a toxic and sick individual, but I'm so deeply in it, I don't know how to get out of it without help. And there is help. I promise you there's help. From me, from Jennifer, from lots of other people. But this kind of manipulation is awful. Awful, whether it's threatening to take the kids away or using them as pawns, using gaslighting, financial abuse. Boy, when you're dealing with an emotional abuser or a narcissist in court, they're going to keep kicking the can down the road, moving the goalposts, coming up with charges after charges, and try to bleed you dry financially. And much of the time, traditionally, if it's the husband, and again, I work with men and women, plenty of women are narcissists as well. Let me be clear. But typically what you'll see is they're going to try to suck everything out of you financially, so you have nothing left. There's nothing left that you can fight with. And then again, if they're with an attorney who is just keeping it going too, and I will say most attorneys probably aren't that familiar with these folks. They don't know how to discern Because if I'm an attorney, someone hires me to defend that person. That's my job. I've got to do my job. But sometimes there are some attorneys who are familiar and they will set their client straight. Okay, let's be realistic here. Or they could keep things going as well. So the abuse continues on in court. And then after the divorce, if you have to share custody, it's, again, the narcissist isn't going to change. They are constantly in victim and hero mode. They're poor people. Everybody's they're being mean to anyone. They're the hero and the victim, and they're going to portray that much of the time to the kids and continue to that's why it's really hard to co-parent with someone who is a narcissist. You have to sometimes, it's not impossible. I mean, it's possible to do that. You just have to be really structured with it and really able to set boundaries and create a strategy for communication and all of that, especially if the kids are younger. But they do a job, and by the time you're getting out of a relationship, the damage has been so significant. Again, this is just in romantic relationships. If you have a narcissist in your family, that will, as a parent or a significant person in your life, even a sibling, significant harm can be done as well and make you even more vulnerable to that familiarity of someone that you may get involved in romantically. So again, there's so much to talk about. I'll take a breath and ask you what your thoughts are about that too.
There's just so much to unpack, and I'm just over here nodding my head because I've lived through it. I've been involved with 2 narcissists in my life.
Yeah.
And while there were similarities, there's also a different way in which it shows up and how my first marriage, obviously, you talk about the love bombing, and even right before things started getting really bad, when something happened the first time, I was shocked. First time I was just like whacked across the face. I took myself back a little bit but he was very apologetic and he was so sorry. And I don't know what got over me. First time it happened, you forgave him, right? Second time you're looking at it a little bit different, like, okay. And there was always an excuse. And the excuses were at first him asking for forgiveness for what he had done. Well, then that evolved into, you're bringing this on yourself. And I stayed with him for 10 years and he beat the hell out of me for almost 10 years. And then towards the end started going after our oldest son, who was 8 at that time. And now when I get asked, especially by somebody who just was never in a scenario like that, I get a little angry because the way it's said, very flippant, like, why didn't you just leave? This man threatened to kill our children.
Yeah.
And I had already saw how abusive he was to our one child. Then he threatened to kill my family members. So when you have somebody who you see how violent they are with you and your children, you believe that they're going to go and do what it is that they say they're going to do. So his narcissism to this day is just unbelievable. I was the reason everything happened.
Yeah.
He's a convicted felon on multiple counts and blames me that he can't own a handgun and blames me that he can't work around money and blames me and this is 28 years ago. You know what I mean? It doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. And then the second one that I was married to, it was a very different way. It was love bombing at the beginning, and then it was just made to feel like I was getting him out of something that they didn't want to be in anymore, which I did. And then as everything ended, when I think he saw that he could no longer have a stronghold over me, he methodically badmouthed me to every single person who was around, because when he saw he couldn't get to me anymore, he went out to people who knew me, who I was close to, who I was friends with, and specifically started to badmouth me there. Obviously, years later, people realize that's not true for a series of circumstances that happened, but it's just amazing in how different yet similar it was and how they showed up differently in situations. And I think I'm a pretty smart person. I'm very intelligent. I'm very in tune with feelings, and I think I have a very high emotional IQ, and but it got past me. And I think when my most recent being involved with a narcissist, I think I was so embarrassed to outwardly admit that, okay, should have saw this coming. I'd been with somebody before who was very similar to this. And I think what was, more harmful to me too, I think the second narcissist that I was in a relationship with was far more hurtful. And maybe, you can give a little bit of your opinion about this, because the things that the first one did to me, he preyed on and saw what my weaknesses were, and saw that if I was talked to in a certain way, even though he knew what all happened in the first situation, he would prey on that, and he would prey on my weaknesses. He would prey on my children's weaknesses. And that was very, to a point, embarrassing for me. I couldn't believe I found myself almost in a similar situation, but with no physical abuse. It was just all emotional and financial abuse. So it's hard when you're in the middle of it to see it. But when you're on the outside of it, you're like, oh my gosh, it's easier to see. So if somebody is watching this and there's something that we're talking about that makes a light bulb go off, like weaponizing the kids or financial control or love bombing and then things slowly changing, don't blame yourself in this. I spent so many years blaming myself for walking into what I walked into and then somehow finding it again and walking into that. Don't blame yourself for that.
Yeah.
I think it's just trying to figure out how you ended up in that space. And I wasn't fully healed from the very first damage that happened to me, that by the time the second or the third situationship showed up, I hadn't gained all my footing. I was still figuring out where I was at. And it was just because it was calm. There wasn't a physical component of it. There wasn't chaos. It was a quiet, methodical, narcissistic relationship. And then, like you were talking about family members, then there was narcissism that supported the narcissist. I could see the traits in other people in their lives that were related to them. Now I look back on it and I'm sad for the fact that these other people just have no clue, and they'll spend their whole lives doing this to other people, and they don't have the emotional intelligence to realize that it's something internal. They're not willing to take that conversation and internalize that. I feel sad for that, but I also feel pretty proud of myself that I now can identify it if something is happening to me, if it's in a relationship, a friendship, if it's in a client dynamic, if it's in something where I can come right at it and be like, oh, I identify these behaviors pretty well. And we're either going to discuss it or we're just not going down that road. And I think it's interesting too that you said not all narcissists are emotional abusers, or was it the other way?
Yeah. Not all emotional abusers are narcissists.
Not all
Every single narcissist is an emotional abuser. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And what is I know we're going kind of a little off topic, but what is the real difference, and why is one always a narcissist but the other isn't?
And let me say before I go there, I want to say two things. One, you are a perfect example of how it's important to know people who get in these relationships. It has nothing to do with intelligence. Nothing. You are extraordinarily bright, extraordinarily educated, extraordinarily accomplished. It has nothing to do with intelligence. A lot of times I think people end up with people with broken wings.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a big component, because again, most people who get involved and they're vulnerable and they want to show up. They're nice. They're loyal. They are smart. Again, people who are narcissists choose people who are going to make them look good. They're not choosing someone who's going to make them look bad, because they're all about their own ego. So you can be as bright and vulnerable at the same time. And if you have a propensity to pick people with broken wings, they're going to take advantage of that. Narcissists are mean. They know what they're doing. And emotional abusers know what they're doing too, most of the time. And I think we had talked about this at some point in an episode before. You've got these circles, the concentric circles, where there's a big overlap. So again, every narcissist is emotionally abusive, but not every emotional abuser is a narcissist. Some people grow up thinking this is just how you treat people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not nice. They know it's not nice, but maybe they think this is the way you're supposed to do it. Like you're supposed to yell at your spouse. You're supposed to yell and hit. You're supposed to throw. You're supposed to be tough and a jerk because that's the way you. If that's how you grew up and that's what you think is normal, yes, it can be emotionally abusive or other abusive, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are a narcissist. Because to me, I think if someone who has empathy, which narcissists don't, they're very manipulative again, and they're malicious. Not every single person who is emotionally abusive is doing it out of malice. Much of the time it is, and I'm not making excuses, but I am saying that it could be that maybe I grew up with the silent treatment. And so that's what I learned. I'm not saying I did, I'm just saying using it as an example.
Right.
Maybe how I grew up with, somebody was upset with me and they didn't talk to me for 3 or 4 days, no matter what I did. But that's what I thought was normal. So maybe in my relationship, that's what I do. If I'm upset about something, I'm not going to talk to you for 2, 3, 4 days. But to me, in that situation, that could be what I grew up with. And that's just the way I think relationships are, unless I become more educated about it and learn about it and learn different ways. And I'm interested in learning different ways. And I can be accountable for my behavior. But there's no accountability with a narcissist. There's no, because everything is the victim's fault or the spouse's fault or family member's fault. And there are different types of narcissists, but basically they all are very ego-driven because their ego is often very fragile. They don't seem to go together, but they need the feed. They need the supply. And again, they will pick people who make them look good and feel good, and that's the supply. And so we can talk about different ways to kind of deal with that, different ways to interact with narcissists. And again, I cover some of this stuff in my kind of elementary course just to help prepare someone go through a divorce like this. But you're not with a narcissist because you're stupid. You're not with a narcissist because you have nothing up here. You're with somebody because you're vulnerable, because you want to help. You want to keep the peace. If this person started off as very abusive, most likely you wouldn't have stayed. Like if they showed you who they are in the beginning, kind of a turn off. Most people, they're not going to show you. They're going to love bomb you. They're going to hook you. And then you start that cycle. Like you said, the first time you got hit, was that an anomaly? It never happened before. And then that became the norm. And then beyond and beyond and beyond. So looking at you has nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with survival. You had to survive. And you knew what this guy was capable of because he did it to you. He did it to your kids. And so his threat was a real threat. It was not an empty threat. And only having him in jail was the only thing that kept you safe at that time. You are to be commended with the way that you were able to survive and your kids surviving, but you were with a monster. And so anybody who says, well, why don't you just leave? And I'm not speaking like I've been in that situation. I will not say that because I haven't, but I know enough not to ever ask that question.
It's also the tone in which you ask somebody that. I was being interviewed for a magazine, and it was a pretty high-profile magazine, and it was a guy who was interviewing me. And he said, I don't get it. Why don't people like you just leave? And it was the way in which he asked, that he said what he said, and he asked the question, and he made the statement, that I almost lost it. Like I almost completely was done with the interview and all. And we had a very good conversation because I've matured past that. And I think we probably need to do it on another show, is really talk about the different types of narcissists, because my first experience with a narcissist was totally different than my second experience. It was almost like I went from a casual, informal, non-educated type of narcissist into one who was very highly effective at his game. And I'm sure the game is still being played.
Yeah.
So there is a huge difference, I think, in the way they handle it. We're very methodical, very, even through our divorce, just different. It was like a total chess game that was just narcissistic and ridiculous. And now looking at it again, I could see it, and I could see it way further now looking back in rather than when I was in it thinking now. And I'm total broken wing. I grew up wanting to be a veterinarian, and my mom is absolutely not. You cannot. You're going to have 900 cats and 500 dogs and lizards and everything else. I'm a total broken wing person. And one of the things you were talking about too, my oldest son was 8 when we were removed from this whole situation. And I remember getting called to the school. I can't remember what grade he was in, second. And he was in there for beating up a little girl on the playground. And I couldn't believe it, because when the principal had told me who she was, I knew my son had talked about her so much. And I thought that was your friend. And he's like, well, I really like her. And he said, well, this doesn't make sense. But to him, it was because that's all he ever saw his father demonstrate to me. My dad loves my mom, right?
Yes.
Like, this is how he shows it. So I think for him entering into a relationship, even at 8, like the little girl on the playground, that's how that started, because that's all he saw. That's what was demonstrated to him. And as he's gotten older, obviously, he has still struggled. He has PTSD like I do from what we experienced. But I didn't see as much of a narcissistic profile in my older son, but I think he has had moments of being very emotionally abusive. And that's hard to say as a mother. But at the same time, understanding what his introduction to relationships and what love looked like was a very learned behavior, because that was all he saw.
Exactly.
I think post-divorce, one of the ones that's going to show up the most, I think, would be the never-ending guilt trip.
Yeah.
Of you did this and you did that. And you probably see it more than I do as far as narcissists and relationships there. I see a lot of very high conflict personalities. I see a lot of women that come in that are really struggling with co-parenting, really struggling with getting anything that's supposed to have been done post-divorce done according to the order. Like, I see a lot of those things. And it is a constant guilt trip. It is a constant thing about the kids, and you didn't do this, and you used to be this way. As we wrap up today, and I definitely want to have narcissism part 2 that we come out and we talk about, because I think it's definitely one that we need to talk about, the types of narcissists. Is there any bit of advice that you can give someone as we wrap up today, that if they find themselves in this conversation, what is it that they need to do? What can they do to start making sense of some things?
One more tactic to talk about, and then, because this is important and it has to do with the response to that question. A narcissist they're going to push your buttons, and then you're going to react. And that's when they videotape you. That's when you start looking like you're out of your mind. And then they're going to say, why are you so upset? Why are you getting so upset for? Why are you acting so crazy?
I had a really good friend who turned out to be a nasty narcissist, and very methodical, very strategy driven to get what she wanted out of the situation. And she did. Yeah. Now you have a narcissist married to another narcissist, and don't know how productive that's going to be.
That's true. That'd be an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Talk about that. No, it doesn't matter. I happen to work with more women who are victims of narcissistic relationships, but yes, plenty. It's not gender specific at all. But it's important, if you find yourself in this kind of a situation, reach out to people who can help. Have a conversation with someone. Just because you're in a situation like this doesn't mean you have to leave, or you don't have to leave right away. And I will always tell people, I'm not going to tell people what to do, but if they're in danger, I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm obligated to help you get some help. But talk to people who are in a position like myself, or like you, or an attorney, somebody who understands some of what you're going through, what these dynamics are. Being educated about what this is extremely valuable. Knowledge is power. I say this all the time. Knowledge is power. And if you know what you're dealing with, then you can plan and prepare and figure out what are some next best steps. To me, it's about baby steps. But reach out to people who can help. Listen to YouTube videos like this. Watch YouTube videos. Read articles. Google stuff. There's so much information You're not alone, but you feel alone and you feel isolated most of the time and embarrassed and ashamed. There's so much that goes into this, but there are people who won't treat you as if you're worthy of shame, because you're worthy of so much more. But that part has been snuffed out to the point where, it's got to be revived, and you have to learn about yourself again, who you are. But there are resources to help. So if you find yourself in this situation, there are plenty of people who can help you kind of step into more of your power with knowledge and with strength and figure out what are the next best steps. You don't have to spend the rest of your life in this kind of a situation, but you want to be mindful about how you deal with it. You want to be as strategic as you can and thoughtful as you can about what steps you need to take to be in a healthier kind of life situation.
So you talk about resources, and you had mentioned your course. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I created a course. I call it a dirty divorce from an emotional abuser or narcissist. And it's a fundamental hour and 15-minute course that really talks about what is emotional abuse. What does it look like? What about gaslighting? What about financial abuse? And there are some examples of what happens when you're divorcing someone who is this emotional abuser or narcissist. What kind of dirty tricks are they going to pull? And they're going to pull out all the stops.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just a helpful way. It's not therapy, but it's a helpful way of recognizing signs, being able to prepare for court, being able to be as mindful and mindfully aware of your emotional and mental state as you can be. Because if you are unstable or you act out in an unstable way, that will be used against you. So it takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to learn how to become stable in that situation. There are plenty of resources for that. And we talk about ways to cope, ways to heal, and self-care. And we talk about financial abuse and different resources like that. So it's a foundational course that can help you prepare for what lies ahead as you go through a divorce. And I'll say one more thing. These divorces are labeled as high conflict, but the conflict is generally only coming from one direction. It's a high conflict, but that doesn't mean you're part of the high conflict. Your spouse is.
Right.
It becomes a high conflict divorce.
Now, is your course available on your website, or how can people find it?
Thank you. Yeah, if you go to my website, drdeborahwilder.com, go to the courses page, and it's there. There's another course on there for teenagers to help them learn about what healthy relationships are versus unhealthy relationships. But the course is a $47 course. I wanted it to be available to anyone to be able to get a basic understanding of what lies ahead and how you prepare for that. So if you go to my website on the courses page, that should take you there.
We'll make sure that we have it linked in the description as well below. I think we definitely need to come back and maybe do a part 2 or another segment later on down the road where we really dig into having a path forward and understanding the type of narcissists and how they show up. I appreciate this conversation. And if you're somebody who's listening to this and you just are just overwhelmed and you don't think that there's any way you can climb out of what you feel like you're stuck in, that's not true. I'm living proof that you can. We're here to support you. We're here to help you. Go out to Dr. Wilder's website. We'll make sure the information's there. Please connect with her, connect with me. Let me know how we can best support you. If you just need to have a conversation, get it off your chest, leave a comment, send a question at drdecoded.com. If you need to connect with us, please do. We don't want you to feel helpless in a situation that we can provide hope and some solutions for you. So thank you again for another amazing conversation. Do you have anything you want to add before we wrap up today?
Yes,
I can tell by your face. You're like, what?
I wanted to comment with you. You are such a loving, warm, giving, empathetic person. And just what you said, that it's hard sometimes to maintain the professional when you care and love so much and so deeply. And if warm fuzzy were a picture, you are definitely a warm fuzzy. And I know you very well. And I know what you're made of. And it's everything good. And so you can even be someone like you who's so bright, so talented, so clever, and so warm, and be vulnerable to that. It's like a moth to a flame. But I just wanted to comment because I know that's who you are. And this is
Thanks.
such an important topic, unfortunately, and I'm glad we talked about it. And we could talk about it for hours.
At some point, we do probably need to make it not so much a series, but I think too, in how people are doing what you're saying, pushing buttons and then filming it to get clicks, to get likes, to get followers, to get things like that could be more too why we see emotional abuse and narcissism and gaslighting really showing up more, because it's being driven by the social media world that we live in. Because how many times are you scrolling through and you see a video of somebody hitting somebody else, or somebody bullying somebody else, or somebody creating these videos, or whatever it is? People like real life, even if real life isn't nice and good all the time. They like that. They want to see it. They want to see that somebody's life is worse than theirs, or that somebody's life is better than theirs. Most of the time I notice people want to see somebody else struggling with something that they're not struggling with, because then it makes them feel better. So I think too, having the introduction more and more of social media and
Interesting.
just how it's showing up, because I see that more in my feeds, which is why I think as an empowerment coach, I try to come on and I try to inject as much love and positivity and empowering of one another. And because there's so much just heaviness in our world. And I think some of these personalities that have been hiding are now coming out with cell phone in hand and doing things, because any attention, good or bad, is attention. Or thriving off of that. So I think having an understanding and a conversation around social media and how it comes into narcissism, how it comes into divorce, how it shows up, I think those are good topics to talk about as well. But didn't mean to get off on that topic, but you're right about pushing the buttons and then somebody there to film it. That's by design.
Oh, it's by design, absolutely. And that, whether it's social media or in the privacy of your own home, that's where the crazy, if you look crazy, if you look unstable, that, and you're videotaped, and of course the person doesn't show what he did or she did for them. That's what you have to be so careful about. And that's hard to do. It's hard to maintain that. But good point about the other social media stuff too. It's all around.
Everywhere. Thank you for listening to us. Share us with your friends. Our subscribers are continuing to grow. If there's a question, if there's a topic that you would like for us to dive into, please send your questions, topic suggestions, feedback to questions@drdecoded.com. And as always, thank you for an incredible conversation. Thank you for all that you're doing to support people out there who just need to understand what's going on in their lives and in their relationship. And thanks for always definitely being there for me, as you've been blessed.
Those both ways, my dear. Those both ways.
All right, my friend, we will be back again with another episode of Divorce and Relationships Decoded. Bye, everyone, for now.
Bye.
That's a wrap for this episode of Divorce and Relationships Decoded. We hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. If this conversation resonated with you, we'd love for you to share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Remember, healing, growth, and transformation happens one conversation at a time. If you have a question, a story, or a topic you'd love for us to explore, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a note at questions@drdecoded.com. Your thoughts and experiences are always welcome here. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week for another insightful episode of Divorce and Relationships Decoded. Until then, take care and keep moving forward.